Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the Middle East section of the Global Energy Outlook Forum. And we're delighted to open this particular region for us, a feature interview with Dr. Carole, who wears many hats. Today, I'm going to introduce her as Secretary General of the Arab Energy Club. Carole, it's great to have you with us. And we're going to be looking for the next 15 minutes, trying to focus on how Gulf oil producers are positioned as they look toward 2026 and perhaps beyond, and particularly in the context of what's happening on the macro front. I'm going to put it to you as a question whether you agree with me in the thesis that the OPEC and, let's say, Saudi-led OPEC and GCC producers, they've had a very successful year or two or more sort of managing the market under very tricky conditions. Most recently, a lot of commentators have been saying, well, China storage imports help them in that sense, and that might be disappearing. But that in general, they face, a precarious year ahead, with particularly from a demand slowdown point of view. So let me start by asking you, do you believe that is the case? Do you believe that they are going to be competing for demand as they go forward, and will have to perhaps change their strategies as such?
Let me start, Dyala, where it was one word that you mentioned, success. How do we define a successful strategy from an OPEC perspective and from the GCC perspective? That, I think, can have so many definitions, but if you meant that they stopped prices from falling or they kept them in, let's say, the low 60s, more or less stable throughout the year, and that is success, I can say that, yes, this is pretty successful, especially given the fact that they released some of the barrels that they withheld for a year or two in the market without crashing prices. And also you have the cohesion of the group, that despite the fact that we still have some cheaters within OPEC, we do have members still under sanctions, and the tensions, with a bigger group, OPEC Plus, and the geopolitical dimensions. So they kept the kind of cohesion and their influence on markets. So in that respect, yes, I agree with you. It was a successful year. And now we are seeing a little bit more cautious tone coming from OPEC in the first meeting for this year, where, yes, they said that we're going to not put barrels in the market for January, for February and March, for the first quarter of this year, even though market fundamentals are healthy, there are low inventories, demand is healthy, economic growth is stable, and then you wonder why they are not releasing more barrels if that is the case. But then when you read through the press release that they announced, that they published, they talk about a cautious approach. And that's where we are faced today, this kind of caution, given all the wild cards happening in the market. Now, of course, that is on the geopolitics. We can talk about it later. But if I look at market fundamentals, I don't think the picture is likely to change significantly from last year. We still have, yes, demand is growing, and China is the main engine for that growth in demand. And definitely building up commercial and strategic inventories are still playing an important role, but demand is growing. Now, what is more important is the speed and supply growth. And that, because if you have these two horses racing, the one that is faster will take the upper hand, with different implications on prices. And so far, the picture for this year does not look like we are going to have any supply problems. If anything, maybe some of the sanctioned barrels from Venezuela might come back to the market, but then also what might happen elsewhere. But so far, I think the challenge this year is not just about the growth in demand. It's still there, but demand is growing, but also the speed at which supply will come to the market to allow OPEC to release more barrels without crashing prices.
Okay, I mean, that's looking at the immediate, and OPEC will sort of, I suppose, strategize around that. But what about from just to kind of take a step back, a bigger picture for CapEx, Gulf producers, sort of their capacity expansion plans in general, let's say for the 5-year plan ahead? Should they be nervous about the fact that there's a lot of talk? I know China's still growing, but a lot of people are saying that, it had 5% in 2025 growth, but it's doubling down on its clean tech investment. Obviously, the renewables is a very successful strategy. And from an energy security point of view, China and perhaps even others are really starting to become very sort of, I suppose, focused on becoming that much more independent, much more quickly than planned, given the geopolitics. Should Gulf producers be nervous at all about China, and should they be looking for other centers of demand sooner than they were going to, such as India, Africa, etc.?
When we're thinking of capacity expansion, I think we cannot only focus on, actually, we should not focus on the short term, because that is really your long-term strategy. Because such an expansion and capacity is something that take years to materialize and to build in the market. Now, should they be nervous? Why would they? Because if they don't do, first of all, if they don't expand themselves, somebody else will, and somebody else is going to take some of their market share. I mean, they are sitting on some of the largest oil reserves in the world and the cheapest to extract and the lowest carbon intensity. So even in a greener world, even if we have the acceleration with energy transition and some of the key consumers, even if China has electric vehicles everywhere on the streets, there will always be demand for oil, and that oil is going to come from somewhere. So why not from the Middle East? And that gives them, of course, they will protect their market share, but that gives them the power over the market for the longer term. So I think I wouldn't be nervous. I would be nervous if prices are going to crash, because I'm worried about the revenues for the country and what does that mean to the economies of the GCC, but not whether those investments are going to be wasted, because at the end, you do also have the natural decline of fields that by itself needs to be compensated for, and not just in the region, but elsewhere as well. So actually, it's an opportunity, not a threat.
And I mean, that low cost advantage that you mentioned, of course, which has always been there and continues to be, is that it's very valuable, obviously, but is it enough? Or do they need to be doing more? For example, securing more long-term contracts, just sort of securing that medium-term demand, like they didn't now, when they didn't have to before, given again, slow down in demand growth. We still have demand for oil, slow down is still coming. Do they have to put other things into their sales pitch, if you like?
Yes, I mean, definitely the low cost of production is a competitive advantage. But whether we agree or not with the energy transition, and whether it's true that the energy transition is slowing down, I think in a more climate conscious world, we have to take into consideration another important benchmark or metric, that is the carbon intensity. Because it's not just about who is going to produce oil at the cheapest value or the cheapest cost. I mean, Iraq has an amazing low cost of production, among the lowest, but it has one of the highest carbon intensities in the world, and definitely way above what its neighbors can produce. So in that respect, the competitive advantage of Iraq in terms of cost of production is being diluted by its carbon intensity disadvantage, whereas countries such as Saudi Arabia and the UAE can actually score those two boxes of low carbon intensity and low cost of production. And that's why if you look at the press releases from Aramco, from ADNOC, you always see it's not just about what they can do technically, but also their impacts on climate change and the advantage of low carbon intensity. And today it's going to be more important than ever, because the European Union is activating these taxes on imports of carbon intensity content of imports. Yes, oil is not included, but it will be subject to that in the future, and that is important to have as an advantage.
Absolutely. I mean, we saw what's happening now between Qatar and the EU in terms of their LNG and the sort of conditions, if you like, that they're negotiating at the moment as well on those emissions, and that will be a big sales point, I'm sure, if the GCC producers can score a positive win on that. Carole, you mentioned Venezuela. We can't have a conversation today without talking about. We also have seen what's happened the last couple of 48 hours, obviously the developments there. Venezuela, of course, a country that has been under oil sanctions. So putting aside the drama of the fact that the political drama inside the country, what difference do you think it's going to make going forward? The oil was already sanctioned. Lots of talk now about companies coming back into Venezuela. Could we see that? How soon, and how disruptive might that be to, as a member within OPEC and to obviously other sort of producers in the Gulf as well?
I think at the moment we are all going to engage in some guesswork, because we don't know what is going to happen there, and sanctions are still in place, so they have not been removed, and American companies are not back. Yes, Chevron is there, but it's not like they rushed back to Venezuela to sign contracts. And what kind of contracts, if they do come back, they are going to sign? Now, but Venezuela has a huge potential. Everybody knows that. But the problem is not that sanctions were led to the current situation of Venezuela producing less than 1% and its exports have been shrinking. thinking. They played a role, but Venezuela has had fundamental structural problems that go back to 2-3 decades ago, especially when Chavez came to power and activated all these anti-investment, private investment policies in the country. We saw the exodus of international companies. Now, yes, they can come back. And yes, they can increase production from Venezuela. But I like to draw the comparison with Iraq. Yeah. So Iraq was a sanctioned country. It faced several wars. And then when they opened up with their first licensing round, post Saddam Hussein era in 2009, we saw how the international companies came to the country. And actually, they proved that Iraq can be a success story. And it was, because within some years, maybe 9 to 10 years, Iraq increased production tremendously, and it exceeded the peak that it reached in the past. That can be replicated in Venezuela, but it's a bit different here, because back when companies went to Iraq, first of all, the fields there are much easier to manage than what we have in Venezuela. The type of oil is different. The low cost of production is much lower, but also oil prices were much higher. The shale revolution was not happening. It barely started, but nobody really believed that shale will make a difference. Today, we have the completely different structural market dynamics. And that's why, yes, I believe there is a big potential, but when will that happen? Really, nobody knows. It's not going to happen overnight. However, there's an important card here I'd like to place, or question I'd like to raise. What does that mean to OPEC? If we have a big American influence in Venezuela, as we heard coming from the White House, although I'm still yet to understand what does it mean to manage the oil sector of Venezuela. Will Venezuela be forced to leave OPEC? Or again, like Iraq, will it stay within OPEC but turn a blind eye to the quota? Now, that is going to cause, either scenario, I think, will cause more challenges to OPEC. And this is something we should consider for the future going ahead in terms of what Venezuela can do to impact global energy or oil markets.
Yeah, and I mean, not just Venezuela. So that's yet another member which is potentially going to, quote unquote, leave the organization or be exempt. I mean, we already have sanctioned countries that are exempt. We have OPEC Plus, obviously, which includes Russia. Iran is still doing its own thing. And what about, I mean, you know, for the last few years, as you said, we haven't had that sour crude competing with Gulf sour crude into Asia. As you said, we'll wait and see what happens with that Venezuela crude. But it has the largest reserves in the world at the end of the day. So U.S. dominance or not, that's a lot of extra crude coming onto the market potentially in the next 12 months, let's say, or 24 months.
Longer, much longer.
Much longer. And therefore, should other sour crude producers be concerned? I know that OPEC is a cohesive group, but ultimately that is the same competitive crude that the GCC producers are providing.
I mean, I think in the Middle East, yes, they have to be concerned, again, because it's not a small player coming back to the market. But if I were Russia, I would be more concerned because of the similarity in the quality of the crude. Canada, outside OPEC Plus, should be concerned. So they are more exposed, I would say, than the producers in the Gulf, who have managed to diversify their market. And also, they built refineries within the region and elsewhere as well, which are able to take all sorts of crude. So they are much more complex and more sophisticated than, let's say, some of the refineries in the US. So again, I don't see it as a threat in that respect in terms of the type of crude. Yes, there will be pressure on some crude, but the region produces all sorts of crude. But there are other producers who will be much more exposed. And what does that mean to their policy, especially Russia, within OPEC Plus, remains to be seen.
And I mean, could we see a lot of the Venezuelan crude, if there is more of it coming out, going straight into US refineries at the end of the day? Is that something that the US, is that what's behind, do you think, part of the incentive here, and that Venezuelan crude will not go much further than that geography ultimately?
I think the US is the natural destination. I mean, first of all, because of the proximity geographically, and also the historical connection between Venezuela and the US, and the refineries in the US, which were built, and very simple refineries to process the heavy oil coming from Venezuela. And also, despite the sanctions, the US continues to, until today, to import Venezuelan oil, particularly through the license from Chevron. That Chevron is the last, until now, the only major American oil company that is still operating in Venezuela, though under very strict license room. So yes, it is a natural destination. And yes, refineries in the US are going to benefit from more supplies, downward pressure on prices, and also Russia has to face even further downward pressure on prices. So it's like hitting two birds with one stone.
Dr. Carole Nakhle, I'm afraid we've run out of time, Secretary General of the Arab Energy Club. It's been great to have you today on the outlook for the year ahead. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Dyala, and Happy New Year to everybody watching the event. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'd like to give a warm welcome to our guest, His Excellency Khamis Mazrouei, CEO of the Sharjah National Oil Corporation. Mr. Mazrouei, thank you so much for joining us at the Outlook Forum.
It's a pleasure always to join GI and the Energy Forum.
It's great to have you. A lot to talk about. I'd like to start by talking a bit about last year, 2025. I mean, it was quite a year for SNOC, you know, very, very dynamic year as usual, but a lot of announcements, especially towards the tail end of the year. If you look back on last year, just in your sort of perspective, what would you say were the top three sort of milestones or achievements for the company?
Since I become the CEO of SNOC in April 2025, last April, we've strengthened our operational reliability across all our assets. We maintain safe and uninterrupted production and supplies throughout the year. In June last year, we launched SNA, which is the Sharjah first utility scale solar plant. And in November, we've completed drilling our second appraisal well in Hidayba field with good results. During ADIPEC, again in November, we signed an MOU with Siemens Energy and Decahydron to develop a white hydrogen in Northern Emirates. While doing all that, we are advancing our digital transformation initiative by streamlining our workflows and improving data-driven decisions across the company. So it was a very
Thank you so much for joining us at the Outlook Forum.
It's a pleasure always to join GI and the Energy Forum.
It's great to have you. A lot to talk about. I'd like to start by talking a bit about last year, 2025. I mean, it was quite a year for SNOC, you know, very, very dynamic year as usual, but a lot of announcements, especially towards the tail end of the year. If you look back on last year, just in your sort of perspective, what would you say were the top three sort of milestones or achievements for the company?
Since I become the CEO of SNOC in April 2025, last April, we've strengthened our operational reliability across all our assets. We maintain safe and uninterrupted production and supplies throughout the year. In June last year, we launched SNOC, which is the Sharjah first utility scale solar plant. And in November, we've completed drilling our second appraisal well in Hadeba field with good results. During ADIPEC, again in November, we've signed an MOU with Siemens Energy and Decahydron to develop a white hydrogen in Northern Emirates. While doing all that, we are advancing our digital transformation initiative by streamlining our workflows and improving data-driven decisions across the company. So it was a very
a fantastic year. Congratulations, and what a year for you to come into the top role. But let's touch a bit on one or two of those milestones from last year. I mean, as you said, the solar project, the SNOC facility, it's one of the first projects in the world, which is powering sort of an oil and gas facility with the solar energy. Was this done to sort of support SNOC's net zero journey? Again, you're in a company that's very ambitious about your net zero goals internally and also in terms of as a supplier to the Emirates and beyond. How does it support specifically SNOC's net zero journey in that sense? If you can elaborate a bit on that.
Yeah, indeed, SNOC, a 60 megawatt solar plant, is a major step in SNOC decarbonization journey. It actually reduced our emissions, scope 1 and 2, by 20%. So it makes us 20% ahead on our net zero target. At the same time, it's the first utility scale project in Sharjah. So it is basically the first step towards a greener and renewable projects in Sharjah. So it both support us in our net zero as a company. At the same time, it is putting the first step for Sharjah also in the renewable energy.
Absolutely. And I mean, moving on to the Hadeba field again, which is, you just announced that a month ago, a major development. Does this, I mean, if you can give us a few figures on the production outlook in terms of how that contributes to Sharjah's production outlook, and even the energy security of the UAE as a whole, and how that contributes towards that.
We've discovered the Hadeba in 2024, and we are now appraising the field through Hadeba 2 basically, and Hadeba 3 also we're progressing drilling to appraise the field as well. So adding a new field to our existing 4 production fields. We have 5 gas fields in Sharjah. We've added 2 on the last 5 years, Mahani and Hadeba, and we've dedicated one of the fields to gas storage. So having a new gas fields to the production stream, it is increasing our basically ability in SNOC to be the reliable energy provider in Sharjah, increasing the energy security, and we do it by utilizing also gas storage. So
that's
having
right.
more in Emirate production and using the gas storage magnifies the scale of the project. So
Absolutely.
we have a diversified actually a gas supply in Sharjah for power generation. We have our production from our fields. We have the production from the gas storage, which is a more strategic fields, and we have a third-party gas contract with ADNOC now for 10 years. So we are blending this mix to provide a gas supplies beside what we just introduced recently, SNOC, a renewable energy source to the energy mix of Sharjah.
Yeah, and all, of course, all are contributing towards the energy security of the UAE, but also beyond that as a critical supplier as well. Your Excellency, you also touched on this really, for me, a very exciting development. I mean, we follow the hydrogen markets quite closely. There's been a lot of talk on the reuse of hydrogen, green, blue, pink, etc. Now, looks like what you and Siemens and Dehydron are working on may even challenge green hydrogen, because you announced this collaboration on just using natural hydrogen from carbon mineralization, which is in its early stages, but one would assume it's going to be quite cost competitive, because again, you're just using what's naturally there, obviously with a lot of technology. What's the potential, do you think, for that in terms of putting it to use for industrial consumption and power generation? Of course, power generation is the top of everyone's mind now, with the power that we're going to need for data centers, etc. How significant do you think this particular new type of technology find is?
Yeah, it has indeed a potential, but it is in very early stage. We've put the right steps. So we engaged, or we signed a MOU with Decahydron to explore the potential. We have the data. We have actually a well data that we can use it for studies. Now we signed MOU with Siemens and Decahydron for the development, whether the generation of using the white hydrogen to generate power, or to produce hydrogen and develop the industry. As you know, Sharjah is the UAE industrial hub. It accounts for 35% of the industries in Sharjah, in UAE. So we are working with Decahydron, Siemens, to explore, quantify the potential, and see what we'll do with it. The Northern Emirates and UAE market is basically having a strong demand in the energy. So we need every energy source. We need the gas,
absolutely,
we need the solar, we need the hydrogen, and we are working with the right partners really to see the best way to do it.
Absolutely. I mean, let's talk a bit wider than the UAE as well, and where the UAE falls, and Sharjah and the UAE falls into, the regional gas market. I mean, clearly SNOC's role as a gas supplier and pipeline operator is very significant, particularly the Northern Emirates. What is your point of view on how the regional gas market is going to develop in the next everyone looks at a 5-year trajectory, whether we're talking about equity markets or gas markets. As you just said there, huge demand for gas in the region. You have other suppliers as well. You've got Egypt that used to be a net supplier, now it's a net importer. There's so many dynamics around there. So how do you see the Northern Emirates plugging into the regional gas market in the future, if at all?
Yeah, indeed, we see a very strong demand for the gas in the region in general, and specific in the Northern Emirates. We could see the urbanization growth in the Northern Emirates is increasing a lot, and it's obvious in the development around us when we look outside. So we see the demand in general very strong in Northern Emirates, and consequently the gas, basically the base load supply for the energy will be higher. So, and this was strengthened by having additional gas lines or strategic gas lines in the Northern Emirates. The network is well developed actually, but due to the increase of the demand and ADNOC also plan of self-sufficiency for the UAE. Now we have a direct pipeline under construction from ADNOC sites on the onshore, landing in Sharjah, that will strengthen the position of Sharjah and put the Northern Emirates in I would call it in supply abundance, where we have pipeline coming from Dolphin, from ADNOC, legacy pipelines by Emirate or FIWA. Now it's called Ittihad or Emirat Network, SNOC, DOSO pipelines. So we are seeing a development and increase on the network in the Northern Emirates to meet the high demand.
Absolutely. What about clean, sort of other fuels? I mean, moving away a bit from gas in terms of condensate markets, etc., and oil. What is the outlook, do you think, for SNOC, and how is it positioning itself in that particular market, if at all, or will your future focus, would you say, become more gas focused and less fuels, other fuels?
No, our portfolio actually balanced, and will continue to have a balanced, basically portfolio. We produce gas, condensate, and we trade LPG. So we are developing also our LPG trading capabilities. We used to supply the market of our production, LPG. Now we are importing, or we modify our terminal, and we are actually importing the LPG from external, from the international market to fulfill local needs of the Northern Emirates. Moving forward, we would like to import and export, also use our infrastructure to import and export. For the condensate and crude, we see also, we could see a forecast of a growth, and that is already reported by OPEC and IEA, and it will plateau at certain period of time on the horizon. Is it after 10 years? We don't see it really in the next 5 years, but maybe on a 10 years or 15 years area. So that we see a demand increase. However, there is a supply also increase in the market from non-OPEC, with OPEC plus in the still as a group, and trying to stabilize the market. We see really the good demand, good management of the market. There is a new supplies from non-OPEC. So we see like a price cap and price floor, I would say, naturally happening between maybe OPEC plus controlling or basically stabilizing the market, putting a floor for the price, and extra supplies from non-OPEC putting a cap for it. But we see it is a stable and with an increase of demand. Maybe there is a downward pressure in prices, but it will be controlled.
Your Excellency Khamis Mazrouei, CEO of Sharjah National Oil Corporation, thanks so much for joining us today on the Global Energy Outlook Forum. It's been great to have your point of view. Thank you so much.
Thank you.